Okay, so let us get into the next bit. So far, we've done what our PHP entails. We've done what our CSS entails. Briefly, we've done what our HTML entails. So the next part we want to actually get to is our CSS. So our CSS will try and sort of include most of what we have done so that we can see what each element gives us. So we'll be working with a design, or we'll be working with designs that would want to implement in the way our users work with whatever system or whatever platform we have within our entire platform or within our website. So our website would then work based on what we want to do. So I would want to actually create a website where, or not necessarily a website, a page where we can sort of see how we can put all these elements or aspects that we want together. And I had actually just copied some of this code from somewhere. I'll add some more code and at least have some information that we'll add. So in this particular instance, we've got this code whereby we've got different elements that we find in our page or on our page. And each element has got its own values that we'll then put there. We can play around with some of these values to get some of the things that we want. So let's get to it. It's a bit tedious to always be typing. You can be able to get maybe code snippets, and with your code snippets, they give you faster typing, whereby all they need to do is just add information that's missing or information that you didn't already have. Okay, so let's build from there. So we had our page.css, which was the first one that we worked with. I think we can still just use page CSS. We used our page CSS on home, so we can copy that code as it is and then put it on our CSS tutorial. It will still work. We can reuse it as many times as is possible because it's not limited to just one website. And we can then have our content being unique, and maybe we work with adding information as we proceed. And as you can see in all these projects that we've been doing, we have a lot of similarity. It just now depends on what you're putting, how you're putting it, and what you want to do. So to begin with, we then want to have how we would actually design our page. So our page starts from what we want to see. We want to have a page where, let me do it in my notes. We want to have a page where we have a username, and then we have an input for the username. We want a password, and then we want to have an input for the password. We want a checkbox. We want a button. We want a link to reset. We also want a link to register. these are some of the things that we want to see. So we'll get into working on that, and then we'll also create a register page so that we can be able to register and view the contents of this particular page. So as we are working like this, we are trying to design what our page will then look like. So there's another tag we actually haven't looked at before, which is a div tag. So we then put a div, we then put a div, and with that div tag we can then be able to put whatever information we want to put. So this div tag, we want this div tag to have an ID of login. CSS login. That's what we want it to be, and then we are done. From there, we also want to put a form, where our form is where our content comes from, or where we'll actually put our content, and we take it from there. So new tag is div and a form. Okay, from there we then want to put another tag that we haven't looked at, which is a label. And a label basically gives us the title that we want to have. So we can say user name, and then we can have an input, where our input type is equal to text, and then we are done. So I think with this we can be able to see what our page will look like. Already we've got our CSS installed, which is our line 4, or we have called our CSS, which is an object, similar to what we were describing in PHP when we're referring to objects. The CSS page becomes an object that we can use to access certain things within our page or from our page. And then with our label, it's something we haven't looked at. The input, we've seen it in the previous lesson. Let's go to our browser, and then we select localhost G25, and then we say what is, okay, it's this one. We had opened that before. So already, as you can see now, we have taken our CSS, so it has actually styled this content, and we've got our username and we've got our text box. So that's pretty much what we have so far. Let's add some of the content that we said we wanted. We then have we copy that, we paste, we also copy that, and we paste like that. So this then becomes password, and then the text type would be password as well. Okay, so we will play around with this a little bit more, but as of now, these are some of the key elements. At the same time, we can also add a name property to each of these values, and the name property applies to tags that we have on our page. No matter which tag it is, you can be able to assign a name property. So the name for that one we call UID. The next one is PID, which simply stands for password ID and user ID. At the same time, we then want to put our button, button, closing tag. From there, we then want to also put our links, whereby this becomes forgot, and this becomes register. So, as of now, we have simply done our page. Let's refresh and see what this gives us. Okay, so now we've got username, we've got the username that's there, we've got the password that's there, we've got our button, we've got our forgot, and we've got our register. Okay, so as it stands, we've done most of what we need to have. Okay, so we've forgotten to change some things. We haven't put our button, and we also haven't put our input for our checkbox. So this is login. We need a type equals submit. And the value is also submit. And then from there we want another input. And the type is a checkbox. And then the name is remember. And then we would also need a label to give us what this checkbox represents. So this then becomes remember me. Okay, so if we save that, we should be able to see what our page now looks like. So we've got our login, we've got our forgot, we've got our register, and we're good to go. So we've seen what our CSS does for the most part, but we haven't actually done the styling itself. So let's get into the styling, let's get into how our CSS works, and we can be able to review certain things about our learning. Okay, so we've got something that looks like that. Let's get into our CSS. So with our CSS now, we've seen a couple of things that are already there. We've got our form. We need to actually have a method. We can put this, or we can leave it like that. We've got our action. So we want our action to just give us this particular page. So it's css.tut.php. What this simply means is the moment we click submit, it's just supposed to submit and then get us back to this particular form. So that's pretty much what we've got. And then at the same time, we want to play around with our view, or how we see our view. So we come back to our CSS. We then want to change padding, and we want to put padding left to be 10. We also want padding right to also be 10. Like that. So we click on save. This then becomes right. Like that. And then at the same time, we've also used this function here, which is CSS login. So we come to our page and then we create an ID where it is CSS login, and then CSS login then gives us whatever it is that we are working on, or whatever it is that we would want to work on, which is CSS login there. At the same time, we would also need to work with our input, work with our button, and work with our label. So we can also put content as follows and say label input and then button. Like that. So these then become our main components that we want to actually use our CSS for. So basically CSS gives us styling, and the styling that we get from CSS help us to build or to design what we want the page to look like. So let's get into that. Okay, so let's add some context to some of this. We want to have a fixed width, or rather a margin. Let's actually start with a margin. We want our margin to be at least 150 pixels. I'll need to explain what pixels are. We are simply saying on our screen, everything that we see is actually in pixels. So we want to actually count 150 pixels for our CSS login. We also want to have a width. Let's say our width, we want it to be 650 pixels as well. We want to have a height. We want it to be 700 pixels. We also want a padding to be auto. Okay. So that then makes our code complete. So we've done padding left. We can actually work with padding to the left. We can also work with padding to the right. So this then means if it's the left side, it's this side. If it's the right side, it's that side. We're simply putting 10 pixels on the left side, 10 pixels on the right side. And then now when we get into CSS login, we want to be able to put a margin. We want to be able to put a width. Width is the horizontal aspect. Height is the vertical aspect. And then padding auto, we want to be able to see if the screen itself can adjust and give us a padding that we would want. So if we come back and we refresh, we then actually realize that we have changed the appearance based on what we have put for our given page. So with our CSS, we are then playing with how our content appears, or how our content will be on this particular page. Okay, so we can still play around with how this looks and put different aspects to our page. So with our CSS, we'll just be working with this particular instance and put what we feel could look or change our page. I would want another tag, which is a p tag, and I think I would want to play around with that one and have it suit what I'm envisioning in this. So with the p tag, I would want the width to be fit content. I would also want a padding of at least 5 pixels for each each element. But we haven't actually implemented the p tag yet. Let's come back to our CSS, and then we want to put a p tag around all our elements. So I can put p right there, and I also put a p at that particular instance. I click on save, we refresh so that we see what that gives us. Okay, so the fact that we have actually put a p tag, we've actually said we want it to be fixed within the container. So the container we've got is our CSS login. We are saying with our p tag, we've actually stretched it so that it fits into the container. So we can do that for each element, and it makes it easier because you'll be having so much more code if you are working on a fully fledged website whereby you want to have as many of these changes as is possible. So it makes it easier for you to work with CSS, because all you then need to do is just change your syntax in your CSS and your code becomes easier, and you can be able to work with it as you progress. Okay, so let me just finish up with the p tags, and you can be able to follow and learn as we proceed. Okay, so if we save, we can refresh and see what this looks like. And as you can see now, our content now looks a bit different from what it used to look like. And we can still add more as we are designing. So the design itself, or the design process, actually starts from this instance. Okay, let me just remove the saved logins. Okay, so I think better, we don't have anything now. So we've got our page looking like that. Okay, we can still add more content or more context with how our page is designed, or how we'll be working with our page, so that we see a bit more of this CSS. So we played around with the CSS login, we played around with the p tag. We now need to play around with the label tag. Okay, I'm gonna go for my notes and get some of this that we've got here on my our label. So I think I'll copy that content and I'll paste it in our page, or rather in our label. Would want to have this color as blue. Right, and then we want our text aligned center. We want font family to be equal to Arial, and then we want the font size to be large. Okay, so we can save it like that, and then when we come back to our login, we can refresh and and then see that our label has actually changed to a blue color, and that is what our CSS has rearranged for our label. Actually, let's just keep it as black. I think black is better. Blue is not looking all that nice. So if we come back to our login, we then have it as black. Let's actually change that to medium as well. And then we are good to go. So as a start, this is what we will have as our CSS is progressing. Okay. So some mental notes that I would need you guys to know or to take part in is we are saying most of this information that we are working with, most of this information that we've got, we want to be able to use each individual aspect, and each of the aspects will then be used continuously until we get to the output that we are looking for. So with what we've been using so far, we've just been working with our XAMPP. We need your XAMPP, you need your Apache, you need your MySQL, you need your editor. And in this particular instance, I've been using Visual Code, and I've been typing information that you can follow along. And I'll try and have this content available for you as well, so that if you need to check where you might have missed out, this is a good way for you to catch up and see the content as we progress. Okay, so let's go back to our page and we see what our page looks like. We can also modify the input. Okay, for example, we know that we want our input to have a width. We can also say fit content for our width. We can also say I think we can leave it at that for now. Fit content did not really change anything. Let's actually change the width manually. We want to put it maybe at 250 px. We want our height to also be 180 px. We can save that and then we refresh, and you can see what our code has actually made our information to look like. Okay, so that then becomes too big. Let's actually make this 80 px. We save that, we refresh. Still 80 is too big. Let's make that 40. We refresh. Let's actually make this 35. We refresh and we see what this looks like. Okay, so I think that's a bit better. Not too bad, but it has pushed this remember me to an extreme side. So we need to at least play around with this so that we get the answer or the result that we're looking for. So what this then means now is, as with any bit of code, you then need to play around with it to see how best you can get your CSS to look better and to do whatever actions you are hoping to achieve on your page. So I think with this lesson, I can keep it short and add more information so that we can be able to learn and do various things based on the content that we've got here. Any questions, please feel free to send through comments, and we interact and improve on our learning.